Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Well, US President Joe Biden signed 15 executive actions shortly after being sworn in on Wednesday, undoing policies put in place by his Republican predecessor, Donald Trump, and making his first moves on the pandemic and climate change. Shortly after taking office, the new president laid out ambitious plans to address challenges like COVID-19, the economy, climate change, immigration, and racial tensions. President Joe Biden took immediate steps to roll back some key Trump-era policies which he had promised to do while campaigning for the job. Getting a handle on the pandemic that has claimed 400,000 lives so far has been at the top of Biden's agenda ever since he announced his presidency. Tackling climate change has been another key agenda of Biden's. He signed an order to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, a global pact to reduce carbon emissions, which Trump pulled out of in 2017. On immigration, President Biden stopped funding for the border wall with Mexico, undoing another signature policy of his predecessor, and also withdrew his travel ban on 7 Muslim-majority countries. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze Biden's first steps as president. Joining me on the program today are Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador, Professor Swarant Singh, chairperson, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, JNU, and Pramitpal Chowdhury, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you first. How would you look back at the first few steps or first few key decisions that the new president of the United States has made?
Well, as you mentioned, Frank, whatever President Joe Biden has done after taking the oath of allegiance and after being sworn in as the president of the United States, he has done exactly what he had promised to do. He had mentioned that there are domestic challenges, several of them, and also global challenges, and that he's going to sort of, hit the ground running because he wanted to send out also a message that there is no time to waste. And that is why immediately after the formal protocol activities that he was required to engage in, that he was required to undertake, he moved to the Oval Office and he signed all these slew of 15 executive orders. And the most significant are basically in terms of the impact and the messaging, both domestically as well as globally, is on the COVID-19 pandemic, because there, as you said, 400,000 deaths that have taken place for a population of about 20 million people. And that's a huge number. And that is because, the pandemic has not been taken seriously in terms of wearing masks, in terms of social distancing. So he has made it mandatory that masking would be done on federal grounds. He could not do it, make it mandatory everywhere, but at least in federal buildings, it would be essential. Then is the question of the economy, and then he's looking at a $1.9 trillion stimulus, out of which 1 trillion will go to giving money to those who have been affected. So I think those people who have been thrown out of jobs, who have lost their jobs, unemployment benefits, etc. So that will go to them, and about $400 billion will be to medium, small industries who have been facing the brunt of this virus. Then, right, of course, the race relations and climate change. So I think all these are issues that he has spoken about. But in addition to that, what I could possibly mention is he has sent out a message to the world that America is back. America is again going to take a leadership position. It is not going to withdraw, and that he is going to focus on alliances in multilateralism, working together with other countries to deal with the challenges, whether it is the coronavirus or climate change or trade or health problems. So I think he has, as I said, hit the ground running, and it's been a good start.
Absolutely. Right. All right. So let's take this particular aspect forward of global messaging that the ambassador has just raised. Professor, clearly the message is loud and clear. that President Joe Biden wants to get back and engage with the world a lot more constructively than the US has done over the last 4 years. Issues like the Paris Climate Accord and others, WHO and everything that Trump has done over the last 4 years. Do you believe that it is going to be easy for President Joe Biden now to come back and, take up that leadership role in these organizations and at these platforms?
Frank, there are experts who have argued that in US presidential elections, there should be a process of, choosing electorate worldwide, because whosoever comes to the White House after elections in the United States has an impact on global politics. So in that sense, there is a certain reassertion that we will notice now of reclaiming that space in global politics that has, as Ambassador just now mentioned, he's hit the ground running. It's unusual also because very few times you have seen a person with that kind of experience coming to the White House as vice president. He's been senator. He was twice, the 2 terms, vice president. So he knows every inch, every corner, every regulation, every methodology, manner, mechanisms as to how presidency has to be run. He's been well trained into this. And the contrast becomes particularly interesting after President Donald Trump, who was never a politician. He just arrived and became president and has exited after that. Of course, he believes to continue in politics now. So unusual experience of his. And then, of course, this agitated campaign that we saw between the 2 candidates, which has really pushed the new presidency to showcase that determination, fulfill several promises that are made. So as you mentioned, 15 executive orders and 2 directives on very first day. And of course, 3 levels of actions very quickly he will have to address in undoing or in erasing the legacies of President Donald Trump, which is a top priority right now. First day saw that he can take enormous amount of unilateral initiatives, which can come into effect simply because president wants to really see those things changing. At second level, he'll have to work with other components, other organs of the US governance. US Congress, for example, Ambassador mentioned of the climate change package, $1.9 trillion is going to the Congress, will be debated, approved, etc. Likewise, in campaign, he had promised another $2 trillion worth of climate change. After pandemic, $1.9 trillion, another $2 trillion for climate change. So these are things where he will need Congress to support. Then, of course, outside United States, he's already written letter to the United Nations, giving 30 days notice to rejoin Paris Accord. He's also issued this instructions to rejoin World Health Organization and the COVAX vaccine, which World Health Organization is leading partnership in that. And of course, these are initiatives that will take longer amount of time. And of course, a lot of other initiatives regarding immigration and other areas, which again, a lot of travel ban and other things. So it will continue. I think the enthusiasm will continue to show that high speed of, undoing what Donald Trump did in last 4 years. But of course, the challenge would be to also create his own imprint, what Joe Biden wants to do other than undoing Donald Trump.
Absolutely. We'll talk about Joe Biden's imprint in just a bit, but let's also talk about domestic messaging. Pramit, as far as the inaugural address was concerned, Joe Biden spoke a lot about unity. He spoke about, healing the open wounds that have been caused over the last few years. As far as his domestic constituency is concerned and looking at what has happened in the United States over the last few weeks, we saw what happened at the Capitol. Do you believe that it's going to be an uphill task for him to really unite the populace at large?
Yes, it's going to be difficult. Generally, it's difficult in any government, any democratic system to get things done. And he will be facing an extremely polarized governmental system, polarized polity, and a very weak majority, I should add, in both houses of Congress. Literally 50 to 50 votes in the Senate and only a 4-seat majority in the lower house, which means that even just having a few Democrats defect or even not show up would mean he would have difficulty passing legislation. Um, Having said that, I mean, you're right. He called for unity because he recognizes very well that the degree of social division, class division, if you wish, in the United States, if there's anything that we're really seeing in America, is the return of a class problem, which in many ways had disappeared in America in the by the 1950s and 60s. A concept of class that's something American politics has not had to deal with for many decades. And so that class problem, which goes back to the heart of the inequality issue that the American populace has faced, goes back to the 1980s and has been slowly building up steam since then. So it's taken 40 years for that class division to erupt and result both in the election of somebody like President Trump, the emasculation of the Republican Party, and then, as you mentioned, January 6th, the attack on Capitol Hill. It's not going to be possible to overcome that inequality in just 4 years. It'll be difficult even if Biden were to run for a second term and win. It'll be difficult to do it in 8 years. So he can only do some of it. He can signal that he recognizes problems that these people face, which you saw him do to an extent in the inaugural address. But he's going to have to combine this with a really hard iron fist against domestic extremism. And you'll notice he said, I think the first time I've heard a US president ever use the term white supremacist, as well as domestic terrorism. In other words, he's very clear. I'm sympathetic to your problems, to the white working class and even white working class and among some of the minority groups. But if you're going to take up arms against the US government, I'm going to treat you just like I will any other terrorist organization, which is fine. But this combination of both having to take on a group of extremists, violent extremists, as well as try to heal that class division is not going to be easy for him to bridge. And on top of that, he may have ex-President Trump, basically badgering him and screaming at him from the sidelines and making life more difficult to get the Republican to support him. One of the key things you'll notice in Biden's campaign was he kept saying, I want to recreate the bipartisan spirit that I used to see when I was a senator in the US Congress, that I worked with even hardline right-wing Southerners to get legislation passed, and it worked. And a lot of these fellows, Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, are his very close personal friends. And so he wants to do that, but he can't do it if the Trump hold on the base of the party and therefore his control on the Republican Party continues, which is why it's going to be interesting to see how many Republicans are prepared to vote to support the case of an impeachment case against Trump.
Right.
My sense is that not too many, and that will continue to be another weakness or problem for Biden.
Absolutely. All right. So taking the discussion forward now, Ambassador, so, on day one, what we've seen is that President Biden has focused his attention on undoing policies put in place by his Republican predecessor. But talking about Joe Biden's imprint itself, from a global perspective, what can we expect on that front?
First is a return of civility to whether it is domestic interactions or it is international relations. Because what we had seen also was total unpredictability. And President Trump used to determine and used to communicate his policy stances, whether it was foreign relations or otherwise through tweets. I think that system of reaching out to the world and communicating with the world through tweets, that is going to go away. And there is going to be much more determined, well-considered views that are going to be communicated. So one is in terms of style. The other is in terms of building alliances. As I mentioned, he said, American leadership, America is back. That is the message that he wants to send out. Because what Trump had done was, whether it was the transatlantic alliance, whether it was NATO, whether it was his other allies and partners in East Asia, Japan, Australia, South Korea, etc., all of them, I think all those relations, because of the manner in which Trump used to deal with his interlocutors, whether it is Angela Merkel or it is Justin Trudeau or Theresa May. He used to treat them not very well, and even institutions, multilateral institutions. So I think that is going to be a change. That is going to be his personal imprint on the manner in which things are going to be done. Of course, the challenges that he has, there is also going to be continuity. I don't think there's going to be only, undoing. Of course, he might try to come back as far as the Iranian nuclear deal is concerned, JCPOA is concerned. He might try to sort of, revive it. That is going to be extremely difficult in my view. But I think whatever many of the changes that have taken place, for instance, let's come to China, whether it is the Indo-Pacific, whether it is the Quad, there was lots of doubts and anxiety that was being expressed earlier, whether what is going to be the stance of the Biden administration as far as China is concerned. Will he invest similar amount of effort and attention and focus on Indo-Pacific and the Quad as Trump has given, or whether he will try to extend an olive branch to China by going a little soft on this? And I think what we've seen is he has decided to appoint an interlocutor, a coordinator for Indo-Pacific. So first people were saying he's not even using the term Indo-Pacific. He's referring to it as Asia-Pacific, which means that he's disassociating himself. But I think that doesn't seem to be the case. He has put Kurt Campbell, who has been one of the very strong votaries of the pivot to Asia and the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So I think that is going to continue, and maybe the style might be a little different, but substance is going to be quite being tough on China. Then in West Asia also, Middle East, I think all the agreements, all the normalization of relations between Israel and UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, etc., that I'm sure is going to be welcomed. I don't think he's going to make any changes. So, maybe it will not be right to say that Biden is undoing all that Trump has done. I think he's being selective in what he's undoing. It is not like what Trump had done when he had come. All the things that, all the achievements, all the progress that Barack Obama had made on Iran deal, TPP, climate accord, Obamacare, all of them, because they were a legacy of Obama, he did away with them. But I think Biden is being very, very selective. He sees what is useful for him and he will take it forward. Frank.
Absolutely. All right. So, Professor, since we are here then, from the global perspective or from an international point of view, what do you believe is going to be the most difficult aspect for Joe Biden to traverse through?
Obviously, I think at international level, China would continue to be his major challenge, though he's called it a competitor and described Russia as a security challenge in that sense. So again, these two countries at the security level will continue to be his challenge. China, of course, in trade and technology sectors will also continue to be his challenge. But I think his major challenges also lie in the sense of providing a healing touch to both inside the United States, but also to people outside United States who have kind of become extremely skeptical about how United States conducts its business in terms of engaging foreigners, or as they call aliens. So in that sense, I think he has a major challenge here of not only undoing what Trump has done, and I believe the initial focus is clearly on undoing Trump as of now. The first day clearly saw all 15 executive orders and 2 directives are simply undoing Trump. And of course, also another challenge of not appearing to be only the shadow of extremely charismatic former President Barack Obama. People are also saying that maybe the Obama presidency is going to come back again. So he has to really find his own space over a period of time. Both his predecessors from Democratic Party, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, very, very charismatic presidents. But here we have a president who appears to be a very matter-of-fact person, who kind of believes in doing things, and not focusing so much on advertising those things, or not advertising as well as some of the former presidents were able to do. So in that sense, he has repeatedly said at the global level, he's going to build those institutions that have ensured American leadership around the world, take all the allies along. And even in dealing with China and Russia, he wants to take allies along with So, for example, even on questions of North Korea or Iran, he would depend on allies rather than any personal, high octane diplomacy that we saw in last 4 years. So we will see much less of the president himself being visible directly, but maybe much more visible in his actions. And that is his perhaps a way of calibrating very imperceptibly the US leadership to be back and United States leading that kind of leadership role. And we have already seen the responses that have come from the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and the comment that came from the French President Macron. Both have welcomed return of United States to the global leadership and in taking major initiatives, both in climate change and in pandemic, not just within the United States, but at the global level. So there are expectations that we notice also worldwide that now United States should come back to the normal and be the leader of global initiatives. And I think the fact that he plans to do it very imperceptibly would perhaps reduce the challenges that he has instead of creating skepticism among other countries. This imperceptible and incremental action would perhaps be far more effective, and that could be the imprint of Joe Biden in coming times.
Absolutely. Since we're talking about global perspectives, Pramit, as far as the Iran nuclear deal is concerned, clearly Joe Biden would like to go back to it and try and see some kind of progress there. But what about the Iranians? The supreme leader is not going to just allow the US to just come back to this deal. They're going to want to extract something out of it. Similarly, in several of the other pacts and other deals that have been worked out, the others are going to want their share of the pie as well.
Well, in the case of the Iranian JCPOA, yes, the problem will be that while Biden has spoken at least of going back to what the deal was, going back to the original deal before Trump decided to rip it apart, it's very unlikely that's going to be possible. Iran is not going to reverse the nuclear progress that it's made over the past 4 years, the increased enrichment and so on. And so you're not going to see that happen. On the other hand, the United States is not going to lift economic sanctions against Iran immediately. There's going to have to be a bit of give and take. I would guess that the best you can hope for, and I'm speaking of something like maybe after 1 year to 1.5 years of negotiations, will be a lifting of some American sanctions against Iran, particularly I think what will happen probably is that oil exports and gas exports in particular, the ban will be lifted. But however, investments, sanctions, at least against American companies investing in Iran, would remain. In return for Iran freezing its nuclear program at its present stage. And then perhaps a second round of negotiations trying to see if they can go beyond that. But I'm guessing that at that point, the diplomatic effort would basically run out. On other issues, Biden on China is going to be the biggest problem that he faces. Strategic competition between the US and China will continue under Biden. It will be less rancorous than it was under Trump. The language definitely will be under Trump. It'll be a lot less vitriolic, and it'll probably be less militarily oriented. Biden wants to reduce American defense expenditure. However, he has no interest in reducing, for example, he's already said that tariffs against China will take a while before they're rolled back. And my guess is America will extract demand concessions from China saying, you want the tariffs to be lifted, you have to do something X, Y, and Z. The language, however, on human rights may actually get worse on Hong Kong, on Xinjiang, between the two sides. The Democrats are much more concerned about those issues. And I think we'll see, but I think the real focus that he really wants to do a lot of work on is Europe. Right. That Trump basically almost came close to ripping apart NATO. And Biden, just a selection of people he has, a lot of them are Atlanticists by background, that I want to resurrect or revive NATO. But again, NATO is not going to come back. The Atlantic relationship will still be fundamentally different after 4 years of Trump than it was before. It'll almost certainly not be as strong as it was. And you will see a certain degree of, should we say, reluctance on both sides, Europe and America, to commit themselves as blindly as they used to before on NATO.
Absolutely. All right, time to get quick closing comments now from all the panelists with what we can expect in the long term. We've discussed the first moves have been made, and we know what shape the US presidency is going to take in the initial days at least. But what can we expect in the year 2021? Starting first with you, Ambassador.
Well, I think after this first flurry of activities and actions that Joe Biden has taken, I think basically his intent would be to restore the trust and the credibility of the United States as a leader in the world. Because I think during the last 4 years, the credibility of United States has suffered immensely because of the total unpredictability and the waywardness of many of the decisions that have been taken by Trump. He has not explained, and he has just sort of thrown it at the global community. So this will be his challenge through whatever he does. And I think his performance in the domestic affairs, whether dealing with the coronavirus pandemic or the economy or the race relations, and what he is able to do there will also have a very big, very huge impact, because any country, if it wants to project its strength outside, it has to be strong within. And so I think that will be his biggest challenge, which he will, as he has said, 100 million doses in 100 days of vaccines he wants to sort of send out. I think that will be the first test of whether he is able to walk the talk, whether he is able to say what he plans to do, and whether he's able to achieve it.
Absolutely. Professor.
Other than these targets in dealing with pandemic at home, I think at global level, return of United States to Paris Climate Accord is going to be enormous game changer, because it's the second largest carbon footprint country. And now we are going to talk this year in Climate Summit that we could actually advance some of the targets of 2030, because United States is going to be back into the fold and take up leadership. I think global impact of Biden presidency would be seen in climate change discourse going back to becoming far more ambitious than where it was. And of course, several other issues also are on the table, but I'm sure in major global changes that he could bring about would be the climate change accord, advancing the targets of 2030.
Amit, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
So Biden is going to be, I think the big fundamental issue as far as India is concerned is about how his relationship with China, how will it tactically unfold? In particular, I think the big question will be that if Biden, in many ways, a lot of his economic policies, he has also spoken, are very similar to Trump in the sense that he argues he doesn't support free trade the way that America used to in the past. He talks about American companies having priority in government procurement contracts. He talks about rebuilding American infrastructure, but ensuring that both jobs and the contracts go to US companies. So all of us are heading for some version of Atmanirbhar Bharat, if you wish. We're all being a bit protectionist. What we need to see strategically is to develop coalitions of these on the economic front that are minus China.
Right.
That was in many ways what the Trump administration already begun working on. We're going to have to see whether Biden continues that process. Are we going to have a 5G coalition minus China? Are we going to have some version of the TPP minus China? Are we going to see a supply chain agreement minus China? That is going to be the real strategic question we're going to have to see.
All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. The first steps have been taken by newly sworn-in US President Joe Biden. Remains to be seen what lies ahead. Of course, it's an uphill task, but we'll have to wait and see if he's up to it. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.